I will call the meeting to order. Good morning and welcome to the February 7th, 2024 Executive Committee meeting. We acknowledge that we're on traditional lands of the Treaty 4 territory, a treaty signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta and Manitoba, and the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. The City of Regina owes its strength and vibrancy to these lands and the diverse indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory, as well as settlers from around the world who continue to be welcome here and call Regina home. Some members of the committee and city administration may be attending the meeting today through video conferencing. I would like to remind those members of the following. Please ensure that your video camera and microphone are turned off. If a member of committee wishes to speak, use the raise hand function to be placed into a speaking queue. When speaking, remember to unmute your microphone and enable your video camera, and all votes will be conducted with the recorded votes. Reports recommended for consideration by City Council will be considered at its meeting scheduled for February 14th, and the deadline to register as a delegation for the City Council meeting is 12 noon on Monday, February 12th. Can I have someone move a motion to approve the agenda at the call of the chair with an adjustment to add registered delegation Randy Jess to item EX 24-5 Housing Incentives Policy 2024 updates? Councillor Stadnicek. I will call the question. Any opposed? Carried. Can I have someone move a motion to adopt the minutes of the public meeting held on January 24th, 2024? Councillor Hawkins. Any errors or omissions? I'll call the question. Any opposed? Carried. Okay, I would like to call upon Delegation Randy Jess. Please introduce.
Yeah.
Hi there. Please introduce yourself for the record, the organization you are representing, if applicable, and where you live. You will have 5 minutes to address Executive Committee, after which you will have the opportunity to respond to any questions that members may have for you. Please go ahead.
It's Randy Jess. Live at 1316 Angus Street. Had handicap signage put up in front of my house for handicap purposes that are upcoming, and for my elderly mother from Stoughton that comes up to visit me that is handicapped, but cannot park in the stall because the neighbor, 1320 Angus Street, abuses the handicap parking situation by parking there longer than 24 hours. And then that's all I got to add.
Okay, thank you. Do any members have any questions related to the report that we're currently discussing? Okay. Mr. Jess, I think you may want to reach out to the clerk's office to get your submission sent to council, because it appears that there was a mistake. It doesn't appear relevant to the exact report we're discussing, so you may want to reach out to them so they can follow up with council.
What kind of report did you guys get?
Well, we're talking about the housing incentives policy. So what you could do is just follow up with the clerk's office, and they'll ensure that your concern is directed appropriately.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for your time. Sorry for the confusion.
Right.
Okay, we will now consider EX 24-5 Housing Incentives Policy 2024 updates. Can I have, looks like Deb Bryden from administration, introduce the report? Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you through the chair. Currently, the city provides capital grants and residential tax exemptions through the Housing Incentives Policy to support the development of new housing units that address current housing needs. The objectives of the HIP, Housing Incentive Policy, are to support below-market, affordable and accessible housing options, stimulate below-market and affordable rental housing development, encourage housing development that makes efficient use of established city infrastructure and helps build vibrant, sustainable, and inclusive neighborhoods, better aim the city's resources where there are gaps in the private market's ability to address housing needs, namely the needs of low-income households, and encourage diverse housing options, including housing for distinct and special needs groups. Over the years, the housing incentive policy has undergone both comprehensive reviews and minor amendments based on the city's shifting housing needs, the type and location of housing developments that have used incentives, and input received from internal and external stakeholders. The following, the report before you today includes recommended updates to the housing policy for 2024. These recommendations outlined in the report will allow the city to commit funding to affordable housing projects earlier in project development, provide flexibility in reporting for housing providers to make it easier for them to use house tenants in need of affordable housing, and create a more streamlined and responsive program. These amendments are primarily administrative and respond to requests from program stakeholders and opportunities for improvement identified by staff. The amendments also align the housing incentive policy with the corporate policy framework. If approved, these amendments will be in place for applications received starting in 2024. We're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Bryden. Can I have someone move this report? Councillor Nelson. Starting with you, do you have questions that you would like to? Okay, one sec, please. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Just to get some clarification on this, the policy behind all of this, when we're talking about affordable housing units and we're talking about the apartments and so on and so forth, is there a percentage of the units within these builds that have to be affordable versus what's not affordable, or does everything have to be affordable, and what is deemed affordable? Through the chair.
Through the chair, I'll ask Ms. Pfeiffer to speak to that.
Thanks, through the chair. It can really vary. Some projects that apply for the housing incentives program, 100% of the units in a project are affordable. Others, it's a percentage. So the incentives that we provide are on a per unit basis. So whoever's leading the project can determine if they want to offer 5% of the units as affordable or 100% or anywhere in between.
So in doing that, is there any stipulation on the minimum percentage that has to be affordable within the units that they're building according to this policy? Through the chair.
Sure, through the chair. So the approach that the city's taken in the past is to not, sorry, maybe I'll back up for a second. So one approach that cities have taken to support the development of affordable housing is called inclusionary zoning, where you stipulate a particular percentage of units in any project have to be offered at an affordable rate. The approach that the city of Regina has taken in the past is to incentivize developers to include units as opposed to require them to provide units, partially because, you know, the market here, I would say, is not quite the same as a Toronto or a Vancouver, where, you know, unless you really protect the development of affordable housing, you're not going to have any at all. We've found through the years that the incentives program is actually quite successful at encouraging developers to include a percentage, or for some, 100% of the units to be affordable.
So, and that's lovely. And the reason I'm kind of going along this line is I understand there's some of our affordable housing complexes that are 25% affordable, which makes it difficult sometimes, I feel anyways. So with this, there is no percentage that it has to be. It's up to the city to deem what percentage of the unit is to be affordable housing. And do we have a number of what's considered affordable housing? Through the chair.
So through the chair, I would say it actually, the city does not stipulate what percentage needs to be affordable.
Yeah.
The developer
Yeah.
kind of chooses,
Right.
based on their financial pro formas, what level they can actually deliver those units at. And again, sometimes it's 10% of the units.
Yeah.
For some that I would say are maybe more like purpose-driven developers who that's their mandate is to provide affordable housing, those projects might be 100% of those units being offered at affordable rates.
So do we have a number to say rent is $1,000 a month, that's what's affordable? Have we ever had that number to say that this is what it is, through the chair?
Yeah, through the chair. So for projects that come through the program,
Yeah.
we have upper thresholds for the rents and upper thresholds for incomes that would make those units eligible. As far as units that are not being supported by the program that might be below those rents anyways, just, market units that might be offered at what might be considered an affordable rent, we don't track that. I mean, we would have a sense from CMHC data what's the market rent right now, what's the average rent, things like that. But if they're not reporting to us or they haven't received an incentive through us, we wouldn't be tracking those. Does that answer the question?
It answers the question,
Okay.
I don't like the answer. That's all I have for now, that's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Next, I see Councillor Stevens.
Great, thank you. Part of the recommendations include delegating power to the city manager's office to make some minor, what quoted as minor policy changes. Maybe through the chair, you could just explain, what does that mean? What is a minor change? Just in case the members of the public are asking how much of our power we're delegating.
Is that Ms. Bryden? Okay. Ms. Pfeiffer?
So maybe I'll start, and then if anyone on the team has additional information, they can provide it. So the changes that we're proposing are that occasionally we find, the housing incentives policy is a pretty robust, complex policy, potentially too complex if we're being honest, but occasionally we find projects that come to the city where they meet the intent of what the policy is, but the policy language actually prevents it from happening. So one example I'll give you that we had to kind of work through in the last year or so is that there's a stipulation in the policy that for private developers, they need to build projects that have a minimum of 4 units to be eligible. As you saw through the Housing Accelerator Fund discussions in the last couple of weeks, most of the city actually prevented you from having 4-unit buildings. So it's virtually impossible to incentivize something that you don't actually allow to happen. So we saw a conflict between the policies, and in the intention of the policy is there, or the project is there. So we worked through with our authorities to say, well, in keeping with the spirit of the policy, you can have 4 units in a project. Maybe it's 2 duplexes. So the 4-unit thing is still there. So that's where there might be some conflicts in the policy where they don't quite match with the intention, just because policies get edited over time and you don't see all the conflicts when they come. So that's the kind of level of change that we would be delegating to the city manager to say, this is not something that's in contravention of the policy, it's a slight piece of interpretation. Anything to do with project boundaries, funding amounts, things like that would always have to come back to council.
Okay, perfect. I have a question about the scorecard. And so specifically, there's a component here where you, through the chair, would discuss and evaluate this, say, a unit meant for seniors. Which is fine. At the same time, what we know is there's massive vacancy rates in affordable housing dedicated to seniors, if we're thinking about the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation inventory. How would we consider that reality? So why would we fund, say, a seniors facility when we know there's actually a surplus of affordable housing units for seniors? Would that go into your evaluation and potentially, starve other projects that we actually need a bit more in the community?
Ms. Pfeiffer?
Through the chair, I think it's a good question. I would start by saying that units that are owned by the Saskatchewan Housing Authority are not under our jurisdiction. We have no real say in how those units are managed. And so I would caution on making decisions on how the city is supporting projects based on how either the private market or other governments are managing units that are under their control. If a project comes forward that is meeting a particular need, I think it's evaluated on the merits of the project. You know, the other thing I would maybe say is that, you know, just knowing the kind of the balance of the Regina Housing Authority stock, you know, they tend to be smaller units. It's possible that there's also seniors units that need to be 2 bedrooms, even more when we think about intergenerational families and things like that. So I would say I tend to keep the 2 of them quite separate.
Okay, thank you. Can you explain a little bit more about the home ownership stream? So historically, I think it was a problem where we were actually providing incentives for private ownership streams. That's been eliminated, and I understand that there's still a not-for-profit ownership stream here. Can you explain what that means and how it would be evaluated?
Sure, through the chair. So yes, historically in the program, there had been a stream for affordable ownership that was open across the city, that was open to any developer. And I believe it was in 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. Staff had evaluated that there were, based on the thresholds that we had in the program, there were a lot of resale homes that were falling below what that threshold was. There was not a shortage of housing that would have been hitting that same affordable market. And so at that time, there was a decision of council to shift that and provide incentives only for affordable homeownership units that were offered by charitable nonprofits. So a Habitat for Humanity that also has other criteria, not just an income criteria, and provides a different pathway to homeownership than just kind of a blanket approach.
Okay, perfect, thank you. I'm wondering if you could just explain to me the funding model for this envelope of money. I mean, historically, I think it was financed through a sale of land. We had a big pool of resources in there. Mentions in the report through the chair that it's financed through taxation, which makes sense. Walk me through the sustainability of this model and what's going to be needed if we want to take this policy seriously.
Through the chair, that's a good question. So yeah, historically the Social Development Reserve is where the Housing Incentives Program is funded through. It's up until I think about 2021, it had a $2.5 million budget, and council made the decision to take $1 million of that and put it towards the permanent supportive housing operating grants. So currently we have a budget of $1.5 million, which is the amount that we can commit each year to projects. Sometimes the full amount is committed, sometimes a portion of that amount is committed. I think when we're talking about evaluating if we want to take the policy seriously, it depends what the objectives of the policy are. You know, I would say up to this point, the policy and the incentives that we provided have been successful at incentivizing a decent number of below market and affordable units to be developed. I think if the objectives of the policy or the outcomes that we're trying to achieve are different, that's when we would need to evaluate whether or not the funding is sufficient.
Okay, thank you. Last question. I apologize if I missed this in your response to Councillor Nelson, but the question of affordability. Do we have confidence in the industry to understand what that means in alignment with the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation? Because affordability is a chaotic term that seems to be rendered meaningless now, but it has a definition. Do we ensure that the applicants know what that means, and then we have a proper oversight mechanism?
Sure, through the chair. So at the moment, the Housing Incentives Program affordability criteria is tied to the Saskatchewan Housing Income Maximums, which is developed by Sask Housing to evaluate eligibility for a lot of their programs and units. And so historically, we've tied the thresholds for rents and incomes to that, partially for consistency so that if projects are receiving funding through the city, they're also meeting the criteria that Sask Housing might be providing some funding. But I think it's a fair question on how we determine affordability. And I think, you know, looking at cities across Canada, there's many different ways of determining affordability. I would say even within CMHC programs, it depends what are you trying to accomplish. I think it's valid for us to take a look at affordability more broadly and see what's being delivered. You know, I believe we had this conversation last year at council that, you know, I would say the thresholds we have in the Housing Incentives Program are anything that's below market. It's not hitting a deep level of affordability, partially because there's limitations on what a capital grant is going to get you as far as ongoing operational affordability. But I think it's certainly a valid question and one that the team continues to look at and figure out ways to get outcomes that may be broader than what we currently do.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Stadnichuk, you're next.
Thank you, and through the chair, my first question, I guess, is to kind of follow up on a question that Councillor Stevens asked about the Social Development Reserve. So I don't completely understand the reference to the dedicated 0.25 mill rate allocation. Is that a past mill rate allocation that happened in the past and now it's in the reserve? Or can you explain a little bit more where that, because I don't think that's on, it's not on the mill rate right now, but sort of where that reserve came from?
Ms. Pfeiffer?
Through the chair, so you'll have to forgive me because I'm not going to remember my years exactly of when the budget discussions happened. But at one point, the Social Development Reserve was not, did not have a consistent and sustainable funding model. And so funding from the general reserve was being used to supplement the amount of funding, and there was a decision of council to actually have a dedicated mill rate increase to get the social development reserve to a fully tax-funded model so that it wouldn't have to be pulling from other reserves to fund it. I believe this is the last year where there's a small transfer from the general fund reserve to get it to that 2.5 million for the permanent supportive housing grant and for the housing incentives program, and moving forward it is fully tax-funded. So it has a sustainable funding source.
Okay, because that's what I needed to clarify as well, because it said that it's supplemented by transfers from other reserves until the end of 2024.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we're running out of money. It just means that it's now funded, fully funded.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you,
through the
chair. Yeah. There is a reference in the policy and the categories about support suites. So I think I kind of understand what support suites are, but I'm wondering if you could explain, you know, I assume that they would be in housing where there's vulnerable people, but if you could just kind of explain what support suites are through the chair.
Sure, through the chair, that's exactly correct. So typically support suites are provided in buildings where there's already affordable units that are being built, and they tend to be, I mean, they can kind of be a variety of things, but they would be spaces like counseling spaces if people need, you know, if an off-site provider is coming, a space where they can meet with tenants to, whatever it is, provide counseling services, provide medical health services, things like that. But they are specific to that. They're not like an amenity space.
Okay, thank you. In the chart, I can't remember which appendix, it was appendix, but it shows the number of builds that have happened by category. Do you have any understanding of why there were no builds for market ownership? To the chair.
Through the chair, so let me just find that appendix just so I make sure I'm looking at the right numbers here. Yeah, so when we look at market housing and market ownership housing, I mean, through the years, the policy has changed. So at one point, there used to be incentives for market rental and market ownership that were more broadly available across the city. Obviously, similar to the way that affordable ownership was adjusted over time, you know, the need for an incentive citywide was clearly seen as like the market will be able to handle itself. It doesn't need an incentive at this point. And so the geography for where those incentives were provided was greatly reduced over time, and at the moment only applies to the city center, North Central, and Heritage, or where those are available. You know, I would say why we haven't had an uptake in those is largely, I would say largely driven by the market. If there isn't a development of market housing, let's say in the city center, we're not going to see any applications to come through that. I suspect we may see some of that in the coming years as we're making changes to zoning to support additional housing development. We might see more of that.
Okay. And finally, through the chair, I don't know if this is my final question, but anyways, what is involved in issuing an occupancy permit? I'm not sure if that's the same as like if that happens after a building inspection, but what is involved in issuing a occupancy permit through the chair?
Yeah, through the chair. So an occupancy permit is typically issued once a project has finished its final inspection. So the construction is done, they've met all the requirements, health and safety has, they've made sure that it meets the building code, things like that. There might be some items that aren't finished, like the landscaping. If the build happens and it finishes at the end of winter, typically the landscaping doesn't happen till spring. But, I would say, the building is safe to inhabit and is finished, yeah.
Okay. And I have a question that I'm not sure you can answer, but I guess I'll just ask it in kind of a general way through the chair, is we're investing this money, are we investing this money, providing these incentives just because it's a social need and we see that it's important for the community? Or is there kind of a return on investment that we also get?
Yeah, through the chair, I think it's a good question. The intent of the housing incentives policy is to incent developers to integrate affordable units in their projects. So it's not necessarily incenting new projects to happen, but it's encouraging a shift and providing support for, potentially for purpose-driven organizations to be accessing greater amounts of funding from government to support that need. So I'd say that's different than something like our intensification and revitalization incentives, where the goal and the objective of the program is to incentivize investment, period, right? Incentivize new building, renovation, things like that. So I would say the return on investment that we would see for projects in the housing incentive program is not necessarily measured in this many dollars have been invested in housing, because to Councillor Nelson's point previously, maybe only 5% of those units are actually affordable. Right. But the benefit that we're seeing is to ensure that affordable housing is integrated into communities as housing is being built, and to make sure that not necessarily a certain percentage of units, but that affordable units are available to people who are under a certain threshold. That those units have income maximums for who's eligible to be in them. You're not seeing people who have $300,000 incomes getting units that are offered at that rate. It kind of lessens the pool of people who are then eligible for those units. So I'd say that's kind of the outcomes as opposed to a financial investment outcome.
Actually, I did have one more question through the chair. I just wrote it on the side there. Can any developers that apply for housing incentive grant, do we allow stacking? Can they use it with other kinds of grants?
Through the chair, yes. Yeah, okay. They're fully stackable with federal and provincial programs as well as city programs.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Stadnichuk. Councillor Mancinelli, you are next.
Thank you. I just need a little bit of clarification. There's some authorities moved around in here, and there's some language used like in point 82, the director has discretion to relax the requirement. Just with all the separate titles and everything else, I wonder who the director actually refers to and how those, does that actually move up towards the city manager as well, or how does that work out?
Who would like that? Ms. Pfeiffer? Sorry, one sec. There you go.
Through the chair. So, yeah, at the moment, I think we're doing a bit of a review internally to see where best the program fits from an administrative perspective. Historically, things like the city's approach to supportive housing, emergency shelters, community well-being has been separate from where the affordable housing programs have been, and there's a discussion on whether or not there should be a greater crossover between that work and along the continuum, greater consistency in how we approach those. So at the moment, you're right, the language sits at director, and I can't point to which director, but whoever the director is that will be responsible for housing would have some authorities to approve, approve funding commitments and things like that don't necessarily need the city manager. If it's consistent with the policy and is eligible under the policy, it just streamlines the process.
Okay. Thinking of the last 7 years, succession planning and authorities and people to count on, especially when faces change, everything seems to be going upwards towards a real point for decision-making. Are there any thoughts from administration on not having a robust enough decision-making authority regime, just in case there's any problems, changes, Like I said, it really seems to become pointed in discretion. So what's the thoughts from administration on that?
Didn't they take that? Is that Ms. Bryden? Would you?
Thank you, through the chair. Can you just clarify, maybe?
There's a lot of authority being placed in the position of city manager, which is fine. But on the flip side, as I've stated, in points of succession, understanding policy decisions, sometimes more than one mind in the room is helpful. I'm just wondering how much has that have been thought out, especially because some of these positions, such as director, aren't defined yet. Seems really up in the air to be giving everything over and a change in authority all at one time. Just gives me pause for a sec.
So thank you, through the chair. I'll start, and then Ms. Pfeiffer or Ms. Dawson might want to add to that. But I think in this particular case, it's actually providing the director with some authority to just increase responsiveness. And again, these are where the decisions align with policy. And so I know all of these decisions we're putting before you are to encourage a swifter response, if you will, to the public or to applicants, so that we can deal with applications in a smoother and easier process, specifically when they align with the policy that's approved by council.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mancinelli. Next, I see Mayor Masters. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through the chair. Before I get into specifics, there was an example given for a policy change where, we've allowed for 4 units, but then don't have zoning for 4 units. And so since this program has been in place since 2009, and appreciate there's been amendments to it along the way, why would, for example, that, as well as, well, there's a list of a bunch of them, why wouldn't policy changes have been brought forward previous to this?
Ms. Pfeiffer, please go ahead.
Through the chair, I think it's a good question. So if we're talking specifically about like conflicts with zoning, so I can't speak to when that specificity for it has to be a 4-unit project or a 2-unit project. I can't remember the exact year that change was brought in. I think, like so many things when it comes to policy, you set out with an intention. From what I can recall, that was put in place at some point to try and encourage a certain scale of development. So instead of having little 1-unit, 2-unit projects, and you're managing 100 different agreements, you're trying to encourage the development of larger projects. Obviously, at that time, the zoning would have been completely different. Like, the zoning bylaw was changed in 2019, so I can't speak to the specificities. I would say that we tend to make changes to the policy when the conflict is then presented itself. So, sometimes we find conflicts when we're reviewing and saying, here's where 2 things aren't working to each other. Other times it comes up when a developer comes with a project that we want to support and think is a great opportunity, and that's when you identify, oh, wait, there actually is a conflict in this. So last year when we had a project come up and identified, this is one project, a small 4-unit project, that there's a conflict, triggered us to then do a larger review and say, well, in how many areas does this actually impact? Is it a one site? No, actually it's many sites in the entire city. So I think there's part of a process where we're proactive in our policy changes, and then there's things that come up through the process, similar to, I would say most policies in the city. Sometimes you don't see the conflict until it presents itself.
Excellent, thank you. I kind of want to follow up. I'm not sure I'm clear on the answer. In point number C is to allow unallocated HIP funds from previous years to be committed under the HIP in subsequent years where applications exceed the annual HIP budget. I think my first question is, and then it's referred to under Amendment 3 description on page 5. But sorry, where are the funds that are carried forward? Because it turns out we didn't spend it all in 2 of the 5 years. So where are the funds?
Through the chair, so those funds, if they're not committed to projects, they get returned to the Social Development Reserve.
And what's the balance of the social development reserve?
I might pass to Mr. Hurtis, who would have that answer for you.
My apologies, Mayor, I don't have the full balance of the social development reserve, but I can tell you that there's about 2.9 million in uncommitted funds currently in there.
Okay, so my follow-up question is, should council be concerned, like when we're talking about housing, and I think between Councillor Hawkins' motions, clearly the feds and the Housing Accelerator Fund trying to promote housing, do you have any sense for why there weren't enough applications to build?
Through the mayor, so I think, or through the chair, I think there's probably a few reasons. So again, the funding is specifically for affordable housing units. We have seen that some of our affordable housing developers are finishing up projects, so they may just not have new projects that they're putting in the queue. Some have changed the percentages of affordable units that they're wanting to include in their projects. Again, responding to their own, I would say their own conditions, things that are not ours to be involved in. It's possible that this year we'll see an uptick again. Sometimes development just goes in waves. You know, some of our affordable housing projects or affordable housing developers will have a large number of projects that they're developing, and then for a couple of years they're finishing up those projects and not necessarily starting new builds.
Okay. Thank you. What has industry feedback been to this list? Post-development. Post-development of the list, what has industry feedback been on these things?
The list of amendments?
Yeah.
Specifically? And their response to these proposed amendments?
Yeah.
I would say that largely they've been supportive of these changes. So again, two of the biggest changes that we're proposing in the report are that the city can provide a commitment to projects earlier in project development. So historically, the housing incentives program, you've needed to either have a building permit in hand or confirmation that you meet all the zoning requirements to get a commitment from the city. That's far into a project. And a lot of times what affordable housing developers need is a commitment from the city that helps them then unlock funding from other orders of government. So consistently we've heard not having the city as the first funding partner at the table causes a problem. So this, you know, a big change here is us saying we're going to be the first partner at the table to help these projects start to leverage funding from other areas. The other change is that flexibility in reporting, because we see over time, you know, if we tie our requirements so tightly to specific units, it actually makes it challenging for a provider to have some flexibility when wanting to house people. So on that, we had a lot of support from the organizations that we consulted with. We did have support for some of the other items that are noted in the report that we're not bringing forward, but are continuing to explore. We just aren't quite ready for it yet.
No, I appreciate that. So in terms of make minor substantive changes to policy, where we're conflicting with program objectives, housekeeping amendments, streamline approval, like all of that's good, but where's the requirement for informing council that these changes have been made? So we delegate authority, that's fine. So where is the requirement to inform council in real time?
Yeah, through the chair. So again, any major changes to the policy, program areas, funding, objectives would all need to come back to council in these kind of reports. I think we've proposed that we would still bring a report annually to council to identify where some of those small changes have been made. And at that time, council could decide whether or not that's approved or whether council wants to take a different direction.
Right, but in terms of annually, you can't change or affect any of the policy changes because they will be done. And so if you delegate authority, would it not make sense to just even an information memo to submit to council to let us know that, hey, we made some minor changes, because they're good. Like, I mean, to reduce, but part of the frustration sometimes is that we don't know what's happening. We don't, until someone calls us when they're mad. Trust me, they don't call as much when they're happy. But that idea that, is there anything wrong with just an information? I don't need a full-blown report, but an information item for where some tweaks and amendments have been made within this delegated authority.
Through the chair, absolutely. That's certainly one of the ways that we can be consistently reporting to council on, here's, you know, small changes in interpretation that have been made just to keep everybody up to date.
Okay. Sorry, I kind of lost myself. Councillor Stevens was asking some questions about deep affordability. I can see where we talk about what we're responsible for and what we're not responsible for. CMHC recently announced that not just not-for-profit will be eligible for some of this finance, but for-profit as well, just simply because we need to get units built. We're behind 2 out of 5 years. And so what's our approach to that? We're fine with for-profit?
Through the chair, yeah, the program is, for-profit and nonprofit organizations are eligible for the program. What the requirements are whether or not the units are affordable or not,
right,
and meet the requirements of the program. So, yeah, I would say that a lot of the programs that have been announced by CMHC align with what we're trying to do. And again, they're fully stackable with our program. So if a project is getting support through CMHC, whether that's through the GST rebates just for rental housing development, they would still be eligible. If they're going to offer those units at an affordable rate, they would then be eligible for our program as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. There's also the piece around the City of Regina does own 5% of the Regina Housing Authority stock as well. So we are in a slightly disconnected way, but legislated way, connected to social housing, which the deeply affordable is the 30% of income threshold. We don't ever really reference that. Is there a reason?
Through the chair, I mean, I think it's a fair question. It's obviously an interesting relationship that we have, and so, historically we have consistently met with staff from SHC to provide perspective from the city on opportunities to be addressing issues. I don't know that I have a clear answer for you at this point on our, legal ability to influence the decision-making. But yeah, it's not a whole lot.
I got you.
But you're right, it's not something that we typically talk about, possibly because our influence is somewhat restrained.
Yeah, I just think in terms of all of the housing continuum that we're involved in, that's also kind of important. So on page 26, I think Appendix B, we've got 5 points allocated for parking facilities. Does that not kind of contradict where we're going?
Sorry, let me look up the scorecard
That's
here.
all right.
Sure. So, through you, the chair, so what we have currently in our scorecard related to parking, a lot of it relates to car share, bicycle parking, and then the other points are more so related to where that parking is situated. So I wouldn't say it's related to making sure you have parking, but ensuring that if you do have parking, that it's properly screened and it's not impacting the public realm and other elements.
Excellent. That's a great question. Great answer. I think Council, I think I want to move an amendment. I would like quarterly, and I just want an information memo, just a quarterly reporting. Sorry, Amber. I think I'd like to include that anywhere where a policy is amended. So I think it's F, G. I think it's just, it would be nice to know that we continue that cleanup and if some things have happened. And it's not just nice for council to know, but given that the meeting, it would be received in public, it would also be good for all individuals that may be interested in this would be aware of where we continue to streamline, not just on an annual basis, but as and when they occur. But if that could be provided quarterly, that would be good. How was that for a ramble over there?
1 second, please. there'll be something on the screen, and we
Sure.
can see if that captures what
Yeah,
you're looking for.
it's just a, we don't have a real, like, we seem to get stuck in reports, which have this kind of formal process. It would be nice just to receive an information memo on cleanup that's within the delegated authority, just quarterly, as to amendments to language or to minor amendments that are being discussed.
And did you, it's not a council or executive committee report then, it's an information memo specifically?
I think it can be provided to executive committee in case there's questions about it, but it's more just policy X was this, we amended it to be this. Again, it's communication and education and knowing what's going on when we have a clear interest in this. It's just a communication piece into council, or into executive committee, sorry, but publicly, so anyways.
Does that wording capture what you're looking for?
Yeah, pertaining to the delegated authority, yeah, I think that's pertaining to the delegated authority, yeah.
All right, just one sec, please.
It's okay, you were doing great. Policy amendments pertaining in, policy amendments pertaining to the delegated authority, not policy amendments twice, to the delegated authority. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, sometimes I just feel like we don't know where it seems like a minor thing. It would be good to know. I don't know, anyways.
Okay, so you're happy with that? And so we'll need a seconder.
Nope.
No, we don't need a seconder? Okay, but
I'm good.
Mayor,
I'm good.
do you need to speak to it?
No, I put it out there just so
Okay.
council can let me know what they think.
Okay, so now, this will be specifically on the amendment. Councillor Hawkins, you were next in the queue. Do you wish to speak to the amendment?
I just say I'm in favor of the amendment.
Oh,
Other
sorry.
comments in the queue.
Go ahead. You'll have to start again. I didn't have your mic on.
No problem. I'm in favor of the amendment, but I'll have other comments on the main motion later.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stevens, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Thank you, through the chair. So I just want to know, the intention. Let's say there's no changes. You want quarterly reports, or would it be fair to say that when there is a change, that we get a report? Okay. So you can change it, or we can just have consent from administration that they understand that, so we don't have a blank memo 4 times a year.
They're just working on revising the wording for a moment, and, okay, so,
I have a follow-up question, so they can work on that,
but
that's fine.
also, Ms. Bryden, I missed that you had your hand up, so just one sec, please, Councillor Stevens. Ms. Bryden, go ahead, please.
Thank you, through the chair. So I just wanted to get some clarification. First of all, on is this a report or a memo? Okay, and then on whether or not we bring that regardless of if there's any changes, but we got clarification on that. So it's a memo when there are changes made to bring council into the loop as to what's been amended.
Just an information memo.
Thank you.
You need to change the word report, because you're right. I know that language matters.
And so this is no longer then coming to executive committee, it's an information memo? Because originally executive committee was in
No, I
there.
think they can provide an information memo to executive committee.
Okay, okay. So it, to executive committee. I'll come back to you in a moment, Counselor Stevens. I just want to ensure that this revised wording meets what Mayor Masters is looking for, so is that,
Yeah, I think so.
okay. Okay, back to you, Counselor Stevens.
Just because these things are never as easy as we think they are. What is a communication memo? Because if it's on the agenda, it's going to be talked about, et cetera, versus we get an email with a letter in it. So maybe the clerk can clarify how this is included in an agenda.
Through you, Madam Chair. So a communication memo would be a memo that would be placed on the executive committee meeting agenda as an informational item only.
Right.
So it would be a receive and file item. If the committee would like the opportunity to be able to direct administration to do work based on the information that they're receiving, it would be my recommendation that they not ask for a communication memo to be brought back, that it actually be an informational report that's brought forward. If the communication memo is brought forward, if at that time at executive committee, members of the committee wanted to direct administration to do additional work, they would then have to move a motion to have them bring forward a report that would provide that additional information at that time.
So,
But it would still give the committee an opportunity to debate that item at that time.
okay, to the mover, that's, you want it on the agenda versus, hey, I got an email with this. So it will be discussed, it's an hour-long discussion.
So,
That's fine, I just want to make sure that that's precisely
one
what
sec.
you're intending.
So on that note, are you good with communication memo, or do we need another change to the proposed?
Yeah,
wording?
I don't mind the extra hoop for executive committee to.
Okay, and did you have a question for the mover then?
Yeah, also, in terms of what's in there, is it just like a list of what's changed? Or because your line of questioning was financial, which I'm not opposed to, do you want to see how much has been spent in that cycle?
I think that comes in the annual report, that on an annual basis is fine. Mind you, I can tell you from an audit and finance perspective, quarterly reporting on
Yeah.
reserve funds is probably important, which you'll see the movement out of them, so, but audit and finance can move with quarterly financial reporting. But in terms of this is just intended that, hey, if something's happened to it, to allow it, yes, we could get an email, but that's not in the public domain then,
Yeah.
right?
That's fair.
Ms.
That's all I
Dryden, did you have a question as well? Okay, we'll come back to you again, Counselor Stevens. Just getting more, oh, you're good? Okay. 1 second, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Just another point of clarification. Mayor Masters, when you originally spoke to this, you said quarterly, and I don't see a timing in this
Quarterly.
amendment.
Yeah. What's that? No, it's I think we said quarterly. It's quarterly, communication memo. To any policy amendments, you could put comma if they exist. Yeah, like you're just saying that you don't produce a memo if nothing happened.
Yeah.
But
I
you
think
also
that's
know if
why
you
it
did
was-
something that there is a requirement to bring it back quarterly.
Yeah.
That's it.
So,
Thank you.
did you wish to speak, Deputy Clerk? Okay. And so it was quarterly, but like if there needs to be clarification that only if there are changes. Is that necessary, or is it fine as is?
Well, it defines it as any policy amendments. So if there's no policy amendments, then why would there be a report?
We good? Okay. Okay, so, next up, we have Counselor Nelson. 1 second, please.
Yeah, just to,
Okay, go ahead.
just to speak to this motion. Administration, do you feel this is necessary through the chair?
Who would like to respond to that question? Okay. No, that's not you. Miss Anderson, please go ahead.
Through the chair, I think yes. I think if it's information that council would find useful, and frankly, we need to be tracking the decisions that we're making and what we're doing, so I would say this would be a fairly straightforward one to do. I appreciate the question, but I think it's a reasonable ask, and I understand why you would want the information.
Okay, thank you for that. So the way that this is written, though, it says that administration prepare a quarterly communication memo to executive committee on any policy amended pertaining to the delegate authority. Is that, I'm just worried about the wording, because it's like every quarterly, it's a memo to the executive committee on a policy amendments. Is that wording state, like, I'm just worried because it says every quarterly, and then it says, oh, if there's a policy amendment. So why don't you just leave out quarterly and put as a policy amendment?
Okay, so that's a question for the mover. Go ahead.
I think the idea was, they may find something monthly, but I don't know that we need it monthly. And so if they do 3 policy changes in January, February, and March, hearing about it at the end of March is sufficient. We don't need to hear, what if they do a policy change 10 out of 12 months and they're producing 10 communication memos? Because they're not producing a communication memo if no policy changes have happened.
Okay, that makes sense, and thank you for that. So, yeah, no, I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. I can't see if the folks online have questions. It doesn't appear that they do. I don't see any other questions on, or anyone wishing to speak on the amendment, so we will call the vote.
LeBlanc in favor.
I'll have to turn it on.
Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, the amendment passes 9-0, with Councillor Bresciani just temporarily away from the meeting.
Thank you. So now we're back on the main motion, and I know Councillor Hawkins wished to speak. So Councillor Hawkins, please go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. This is a financial model question, looking at this the other way around from which we discussed. I want to ask a straightforward question first. Is there a current cap in the current model on the amount that can be granted under the HIP program?
Ms. Pfeiffer, please go ahead.
Through the chair, so for the capital grants, we have a $1.5 million budget annually. The amendments presented in the report would allow us to commit more than that if there's money in the social development reserve and if there's enough projects that would then exceed that 1.5 million.
That's helpful. Currently, there's a 1.5 million for capital grants, but my understanding is that that can currently be supplemented by transfers from other reserves. Do I have that right?
Through the chair, so up until the end of 2024, there's a small amount that's been transferred from the general reserve. Going forward, it's fully with under a mill rate increase, so it has a dedicated funding source without transfers from other reserves.
So
But the cap is the cap.
Thank you. So, through the chair, so hypothetically, you could allocate your 1.5 million, and you could allocate anything that you got from supplemental transfers from other reserves. Is that correct?
Through the chair, maybe I'll start. So, so at the moment, we are only able to allocate funding from the social development reserve. So whatever's in that budget, that's what we have. Annually, we get $1.5 million going forward funded through taxes that we can allocate. As noted in the report, there have been years where we didn't allocate the full budget, so there's some money sitting in the social development reserve that we would be able to access, but we would no longer, after this year, be getting transfers from other reserves. It's only whatever's in the social development reserve. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does. Through the chair, I want to be clear, after this year, there'll be no transfers from other reserves, is that correct?
Yes, that's
So
correct.
effectively, the cap is your 1.5 million plus whatever happens to be there.
Through the chair, yes.
Thank you. That answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. So that's it. Is that accurate?
That's it. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Okay, and Mayor Masters, please go ahead.
Yeah, apologies. Councillor Hawkins struck something. The HIP financing that was originally approved was 2.5, right? So it's 1.5 to be spent on projects and 1 million for the next 5 years has been dedicated to the Reaching Home Initiative, supportive housing, correct?
Sorry. Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so in 4 years' time now, what happens to that other $1 million, and is that funded by taxes right now?
Through the chair, yes. So that $1 million that's allocated to the Permanent Supportive Housing Operating Grant, that stays committed to that. That's not, there's no crossover between HIP funds and that allocated money. So at the moment, we have a service provider that is under agreement for those funds, so those get provided to that provider for the
Correct.
operating grant.
Correct,
Yeah.
the terms of that contract are 5 years, correct?
Yes.
And so what happens in year 6?
I'll answer as best I can. Obviously, the team that manages that agreement is not here. My understanding is that there's the opportunity to renew that agreement or change it. But there is the opportunity that that agreement could then be renewed for another 5 years. I believe the cap was put on a 5-year when that fund was created.
Right, so if I rewind to 2 years ago, let's rewind to 3 years ago, 2.5 million, how was that funded before?
Through the chair, so again, you're going to have to forgive me that I can't remember the year that council approved the mill rate increase to have the social development reserve fully
I guess
sustainable.
2018, but yeah.
So then each year, the amount that was transferred from the general fund reserve to make up the difference as that mill rate was increasing. This is the last year that there's a small transfer. Going forward, it's a fully funded model.
Okay, thank you, that's clear. In follow-up to the financial model question, he asked if there's a current cap, which you identified at 1.5 million. Do we have a cap per project?
Through the chair, we have a cap on the number of units that can be funded within a project. But I would say there's been a few instances where that cap is hit, but other than that, no, we don't. And I would, just to add to that, obviously the amount of funding per unit changes a little bit. So, if you're, depending on where the location of the project, the type of unit, sometimes it's $10,000 per unit, sometimes it's $40,000 per unit. So previous amendments to the program had put in place project caps or developer caps so that one nonprofit or not nonprofit, but one developer couldn't take the entirety of the funding.
Right.
So there are some caps in place, and there's been a few times where that's been hit, but it's not common.
So in a hypothetical situation, with the carry forward being allowed, we could end up funding 25% of a project?
Through the chair, I mean, that could happen today, depending on the number of projects that come through our door. In a year where maybe we have 10 projects come through, not every project can be fully funded, so we allocate based on the scorecard or based on the criteria that have been in place. A change that was made a couple years ago is that even if we run out of the capital funds, we can still provide tax exemption support to encourage affordable units to be built. So I would say in any year, we could only partially fund a project with capital, and then we would have the ability to continue to incentivize with the tax exemptions.
Yeah, but philosophically speaking, if someone comes forward with an $8 million project and we give them $2 million, would we not want an ownership stake in that?
Through the chair, I would say that would be a decision of council. That's, currently the objective of the policy is to incentivize units to be integrated. I would say if we're wanting to take a separate approach where we're providing a greater level of financial support, or the outcomes that we're looking to have are different, that would need to be, that's definitely a policy discussion and would not happen through the current policy as it stands.
But where would that be flagged for council? Based upon what we're agreeing to today, assuming. Where would it get flagged that we were all of a sudden 20% granting into a project? Sure. Ms. Bryden?
Through the chair, thank you for that question. So we've never been involved in that type of a conversation. I would say if we had a developer approach us with that kind of I would say partnership opportunity, that we would have to have that conversation with council.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I appreciate that, Ms. Bryden. I'm not actually even calling it a partnership opportunity, but if we're allowing for the carry forward of previous year's money to be spent, there's no cap on spending it on a same project. So someone starts a project in 2023, finishes it in 2024, we give $1 million in 2023, and gee, we're in for another $1 million in 2024. So now we're $2 million into an $8 million project. This is where I'm going. I'm playing the scenario out. Where would council be aware that that was happening?
Ms. Pfeiffer or Ms. Bryan? Who would like this? Ms. Pfeiffer or Ms. Bryden, go ahead.
I think through the, through the chair, through the annual report, that scenario would certainly be outlined through the annual.
But it would already be a done deal. You would have allocated the funds already. I'm assuming it would be approved.
Through the chair, yes.
So I come back to my original question. When would it be flagged for council in terms of a significant granting portion into a single project that would say council may want to consider something different for this, since now someone comes in and they're short money. This is where I'm going with this. They're short money, they come to us. And is it just we'll provide granting because we want the project to finish and we appreciate those affordable housing, or is it this should spark a different question?
Ms. Pfeiffer.
Ms. Pfeiffer?
Through the chair, so maybe I'll try and answer this. To give some perspective, the per unit incentives that we currently provide are pretty small compared to the costs of projects. So let's say that a typical rental development, let's be optimistic and say it's $200,000 a unit to build. I'm sure it's higher now because of construction costs, but typically what we're providing is maybe 10% on the unit. That doesn't count other costs for the building. So I wouldn't say that we're typically at risk of funding like 50% of a project or something like that. Really, the funding that comes for a lot of these projects, the majority of it comes from other orders of government. I would say that if projects were coming to us with a challenge in how they are being able to deliver a project and wanted more than the small amount that we've provided for an incentive, that would be a separate conversation. So we've identified in the report, obviously, some flexibility in how we use the uncommitted funds that are in the reserve. Anything that would be outside of the policy as it stands now would be a decision of council. Okay. So if we wanted, if a project came forward and said, we would like an additional $1 million from the city to support a project, that's not something that administration would be able to approve. If it doesn't meet the per unit incentive, if they're asking for something that's outside of that, it would be a decision of council.
There's the answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. My apologies, Councillor Finder, I missed you before going to second round. Please go ahead.
That is no word. Thank you, Chair. It gave me a little more time to kind of think about, because I came in late, so I'm not sure what questions were asked. I don't want to duplicate that, but one question I'd like to ask, the question was asked, I believe, by the mayor, saying there was no uptake in, I guess, construction or remodeling, fixing, repairing rental units. I look at page 18, and it talks about the previous inner city housing stimulus that was offered. And it looks like from the 2019 down to 2023, from 104 units down to 33. So I'd like to find out, you did a review as a city to review what worked, what didn't work. So I'd like to know why we pulled it. Is the province pulled, involved? I mean, I'm trying to went through the report and I see things, but I'm still not seeing complete picture of where we're going to where we were. We were successful on putting rental houses, putting houses under market for affordable. I think the province was involved with it, and we were. Can you give me a little bit more in detail what changed? Why change?
Ms. Pfeiffer?
Through the chair, so just for clarity, Councillor Findura, are you talking about the market rental
Right.
or affordable rental?
Affordable rental.
I mean, I think any change that we see over time is going to be a reflection of where the market is building and what's being built. So again, the program doesn't provide such an incentive that it's incentivizing a bunch of new building to happen. It's incentivizing units that are being built to be offered at an affordable rate. So as far as what our incentives are, how the number that increase and decrease over time, I suspect that follows what the development trends of the city are, as opposed to something that's, the program is doing well or not doing well. It kind of is a reflection of that. With respect to things like the market rental, that incentive, when it was provided, was responding to a need at the time. And I think it was identified after probably 1 or 2 years of it being provided that it wasn't necessary, that the market was going to build rental housing at a market rate, and the city didn't need to be providing an incentive to have that happen.
Okay, thank you for that. That clears. So then on page 15, it speaks to so the question is, when we providing repairs or providing funding, we're providing for nonprofit, we're providing different things. And I've asked before, providing support to, let's say, Councillor Stevens has a property or two, he rents it, but yet we, in the policy that we have now, we don't provide incentives in that. So for instance, a standalone 1 or 2 houses, landlord has a house destroyed. I was listening to Winnipeg, 700 boarded up houses. To listen to what they were talking about. So my question here is, I don't know how many boarded up houses here. I don't believe this HIP or whatever we're looking at is zeroing on that. So my question to you would be then, when it says about includes rental repair program, provides tax exemptions, repairs for purpose built. Trying to figure out, wouldn't that be a purpose built? That there is a property, let's say 300 of them, then I go on the market, because again, when you talk about uptake, folks don't want to uptake that to go and get the property destroyed again and again and again. So we are lacking in that sense. As you review, I think you're going to review going forward. Mm-hmm. Can you give me a little bit of an understanding of why not now? What's going to change to kind of revitalize, to improve that? I know we're going to zone 1, 2, 3, and 4, so we're going to citywide. But for a while we concentrated on area 1 and 2, now we're going forward. So a long-winded question, but can you give me a little more on that?
Sure, through the chair. So just to make sure I understand, Councillor Findura, you're talking specifically about the rental repair aspect of the program.
Correct.
And I know we had talked about this at council last year as well, but it's certainly an issue in the city. It continues to be something that our team is looking at. So this year, in our consultations with housing providers, we talked with them about rental repair and what does a rental repair program look like beyond what we provide right now, which is tax exemption support, and they have to get support from CMHC or be eligible under other programs. But what would it look like for the city to have a standalone rental repair program that would also provide capital grants, not just tax exemptions? And as those conversations were happening, I would just say that it also came under the Housing Accelerator Fund. That came up, and so we integrated that as part of our initiatives as well, because we know it's an issue in the city that needs some attention. So when we consulted with the housing providers, there was support for it. I would say we're not at a point where we have clarity on what that level of incentive looks like and what the requirements are. We still have some work to do on that, as well as understanding what some of the potential unexpected consequences of doing that might be. And I would just say that we're still in the process of developing what that could look like, and we'll continue to do that work this year. We're in the process of refining that based on some of the feedback that we got from consultation and other considerations.
Okay, thank you. So another question would be, how the decision is made, which project, or how do you pick where do you go? I mean, there's a limited fund, right? So that everyone's going to have that question saying, well, if I jump in, first come, first serve type of thing. How do we, and I mean, it's in, I've seen bits and pieces of it, how you're going to manage that, but there's deeper question and that deeper process that you have to go to manage when you talk about purposely managing of how you want to deal with this, because you have limited funds. So how you choose which project is picked, let's say, or projects? Through the chair?
Yeah, through the chair. So this was part of the discussion we had at council last year because we were shifting the way that we were going to be allocating funding. So at the moment, we have kind of 2 intake periods where people can apply or organizations can apply. The first intake period focuses specifically on affordable nonprofit projects citywide, and then private projects specifically within the city center, North Central, and Heritage. So that's kind of the first set of projects that come through that get evaluated. And all projects get evaluated based on that scorecard. So if 10 projects come in, 3 of them score really high, those are the 3 that get funding commitments first because they're hitting multiple objectives of the program. And then that second intake of projects would happen until June, kind of March to June, and it's open citywide. And then same thing, everything that is received in that period and anything that was left over is then ranked on the scorecard and provided funding in order of how they scored.
Okay, thank you. So that would lead me to the next question when you answer that. When the decision is going to be made, and you just said it.
There's kind of one at the end of March and one at the end of June.
Okay. Okay, I think, thank you. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Findura. I actually have a couple of questions myself. So Appendix A mentions that when folks receive funding, they are required to maintain affordable rental rates at or below cost, I suppose, for 10 years. And so my question is why, I understand it used to be 5, now it's 10. Why is there a timeline at all attached to, like, why is it not just forever? Like, what is the rationale between, or for us to choose a time that they're required to maintain it?
Through the chair, so part of the reason that the requirements were extended to 10 years was to ensure alignment with other programs, so namely the province's programs. Again, going back to what the mayor was talking about earlier, the percentage of funding that we provide is pretty small in comparison to the funding from other orders of government. And so providing or requiring a requirement that extends far into the future is possibly a disincentive. So I think we've done our best to ensure that we're aligning with other programs. So you're providing those units for 10 years based on another program. You can also ensure that in our agreements you're providing those for 10 years. That's not unreasonable. I would say if the program were to change and our level of support were different, I think that would open up a conversation on how long we would want to have those requirements in place.
Okay. And I believe this is in the scorecard section. I believe page 27 of the policy. However, the question is just sustainable design offers 9 points, which seems like a bit of an odd, well, it is an odd number technically. So my question being, how did we come up with 9 points specifically? And then I think I saw 21 points for the section above it, and maybe that's the answer, but why are we doing these odd numbers of points? I believe it's page 27 of the policy itself.
Oh, I see. Okay. It's a good question. I think the points are allocated on this, like the sub parts of what that sustainable design is. I don't know that there was an intention that they would all add up to 9 as opposed to something else. If the question is about why they aren't provided higher priority, I think it's largely that the objectives of the program are to encourage affordable housing development and largely to serve vulnerable populations as we can. Certainly, you know, we have worked with projects in the past that do have a higher level of energy efficiency or integrate different sustainable features into them, but it's not a key objective of the program.
Understood. Okay, I suppose it's just trying to make all the points add up to 100 one way or another. Okay, that's fine, thank you. That's all that I have, and I don't currently see anyone else with their hand raised, so I think we can call the question on the main motion as amended.
LeBlanc in favor.
There we go.
Through you, Madam Chair, the main motion as amended is carried 9-0 with Councillors Bresciani and Mancinelli away from the meeting.
Okay, so that completes our agenda items in the public meeting. So can I have someone move a motion for a private session, please? Councillor Nelson. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Carried. We're going to, I'll need a motion for this, to recess the meeting for 15 minutes. We're at our mandatory break, and then we will start with a private session, oh boy, at 10:39. I need a motion, though. Councillor Moll, thank you. Nobody's paying attention, so that's carried. Councillor Moll.